Hi there, Professor Jared Rathel here. As always, I am grateful to you for tuning in. So, in Learning Activity 7.2, I'll be describing the evolution of the larger, more complex eukaryotic cell, the cells in which you and I are composed of. Of course, not only animals, but protists, plants, and fungi are all composed of eukaryotic cells. We have very strong evidence for how the eukaryotic cell evolved from an ancient mutualistic relationship between different prokaryotes in a process called endosymbiosis. But first, if you take a close look here, this larger blob-like cell that shows up as purple and blue in this magnified image is engulfing the smaller reddish cell in a process known as phagocytosis. That's when the cell eats. So phagocytosis is really important to our story today because long ago there was a relatively larger Archaean cell that engulfs an aerobic microbe, an aerobic bacteria. But instead of digesting it, it incorporates that aerobic bacteria into its cellular architecture. All right, fair warning. So you're going to see a very similar, if not identical, illustration on your next assessment, and you're going to need to be able to identify which cell is prokaryotic and which cell is eukaryotic, composed of cells like you and I. So on the left, we see the prokaryotic cell, which lacks membrane-bound organelles, as well as a nucleus enclosed within a nuclear envelope. The circular DNA is just floating in there all willy-nilly, all uncontained. The eukaryotic cell on the right is larger, it's more complex, it possesses a nuclear envelope. You can see the nucleus here, as well as numerous membrane-bound organelles, including things like mitochondria, chloroplasts in plant and algal cells. Of course, this picture on the right is an animal cell, so no chloroplasts, but you'll see the Golgi apparatus, the endoplasmic reticulum, both the rough and the smooth, the cytoskeleton, which is really important in eukaryotic cells, which is going to allow for that larger shape. Our question today is, how do we make this giant evolutionary leap from prokaryotic cells like bacteria and archaeans to larger, more complex eukaryotic cells some 2 billion years ago? So let's find out. Okay, first question I have for you today. What limits the size of cells? So I'm composed of some 30 trillion eukaryotic cells, and also about 39 trillion prokaryotic cells, but I'm made up of lots and lots of cells. Why? Why can't I just be one large blob of a cell, a Rathel oozing across your screen? So it's a function of physics, the basic physics of a three-dimensional universe. Let me show you what I mean. Obviously, cells are not shaped like cubes, okay? Plant cells can be a bit rectangular with their cell walls, but for now, let's assume that our cells are cube-shaped, perfectly cube-shaped, so it makes the math easy. Okay, so this small cube on the left, the length, the width, and the height, it's all 1 millimeter. So in order to get the surface area of one side, it's 1 multiplied by 1, which gives me 1 squared. That's the surface area of one side of the cube. How many sides does a cube have? Well, if you count them up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sides. So this small cube has a surface area of 6 millimeters squared. Remember, volume is base times depth times height, 1 times 1 times 1, which gives us 1 cubed. So the surface area to volume ratio, or the amount of surface relative to the volume, is 6 parts surface relative to 1 part volume. 6 to 1 is our surface area to volume ratio. Now, let's scale up the size of our cube. So now one of the edges is 4 millimeters cubed. Okay, in order to get the surface area of this one side, it's going to be 4 times 4, which gives us 16 millimeters cubed. 16 times 6 gives us 96 millimeters of surface area, millimeters squared, because we're multiplying. So the surface area went up, just like we would expect, right? As the size of the cell increases, the amount of surface also increases. But let's look at how the volume increases. So if I do 4 times 4 times 4, base times depth times height, then I get 64 millimeters cubed. Okay, so the volume increased much more rapidly than the surface. So if I've got 96 parts surface to 64 parts volume, that's going to be 1.5 parts surface relative to 1 part volume. So the surface area to volume ratio decreased as the size of the cell gets larger. In other words, this small cell is 6 parts surface relative to the 1 part volume, whereas this larger cell is only 1.5 parts surface relative to its volume. So, as the size of objects increase in three-dimensional space, the volume is going to increase much more rapidly than the surface area. So, big idea here. Cells are limited in their size by their surface area to volume ratio. Small cells, like you see on your left, have a lot more surface relative to their internal volume than the larger cell that you see on your right. Why do cells have to have so much surface? Because they rely on diffusion, the movement of molecules from areas of high to low concentration, both to get things that they need inside of them, like oxygen for cellular respiration or glucose, as well as to get waste products out of them, like carbon dioxide and metabolic waste. So I cannot consist of one giant Rathel cell because at this scale, I would not have enough surface to get oxygen diffused all the way throughout my single-celled volume. Hopefully that makes sense. Test question: what limits the size of cells? Surface area to volume ratio.